JC.
Okay, super. Hello, everyone. My name is James Curry. I'm a librarian here at the Thomas Huslop Business Center. I have the great pleasure today to have Martin J. McDermott back again for another presentation with us. He brings over 25 years experience as a business professor and marketing educator. He's a marketing course lead at Purdue University Global. He blends academic insights with real world applications and often drawing inspiration from art, music, media, and popular culture. I'm going to leave it to him to give you a little bit more scope about himself. But before I do, I have a few housekeeping rules. The library uses Zoom, but does not own Zoom. Zoom has its own privacy policy that my colleagues will shortly put on the chat screen. Please read that section that refers to third-party library service providers to understand how you and the library uses this service. The Q&A feature is enabled, so if you do have a question or comment, put it in there. Today's event will be recorded. A copy of the presentation will also be sent, and closed captioning is enabled for those who need it. So welcome aboard, Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Corey. It's such a privilege to be here with you again today. And thank you, Alex and Robert, for helping out as well. I'm just going to pull up my presentation quickly here, and I'm going to put it into presentation mode for all of you so you can see it a little bit better. Let's see here. There we go. Okay, that looks good. So again, welcome everyone. My name is Martin McDermott, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the art and science of marketing. And I got this topic from a book that I had published back in December of 2025. So today I'll tell you, a little quick background information, how I kind of got here to this point in my life. I'll talk about some untapped lessons that I've learned from artists about marketing. We'll talk about the art and science of marketing. I'll talk a little bit about some AI tools, really fun, easy to use AI tools for marketing purposes or entrepreneurship. And then we'll kind of end with a quick Q&A. And again, Mr. Corey kind of told a little bit about my background. I'm trying to think anything else I can add to that. I've been involved in podcasting now for about 20 years. I'm originally from New York, which is why I love doing this presentation, with Mr. Corey and the New York Public Library, because New York is really so close to home. I haven't been back, originally from Brooklyn, but I now live in Easton, Pennsylvania. I've been here for several decades with my wife, Connie, and my son, Martin. And I was called Easton. I was telling Mr. Corey earlier, it's like a little tiny Brooklyn. We still have brownstones. We still have great restaurants and things like that, but nothing compared to, of course, Brooklyn and New York City, which again is very close to my heart. I do have a doctorate degree in marketing. I have a post MBA in entrepreneurial studies. I have a master's degree in international business, and I do have a marketing degree as well, a bachelor's degree in marketing. So I started in marketing and I finished with marketing. A quick story I typically tell my students is I learned about marketing really by accident, or sometimes if you're spiritual, I call it divine intervention. I was going to St. John's University in New York City, and I was in my second year of school, and I was getting ready to quit because I wasn't doing particularly well in my classes. I was kind of like a C-minus student across the board. I was studying accounting, and I remember this day very vividly. I was sitting in the courtyard at St. John's University, and I'm kind of like looking up to the sky, and I'm like, God, please tell me what to do. I'm about to make this very big decision. I didn't have a backup plan or a plan B or plan C if I quit school. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew I wasn't doing well. And something happened to me. There was a gentleman. He was sitting like maybe about 7 feet, 8 feet from my right, and he was reading a book like this, like he couldn't wait to get to the next page. And I was kind of looking at him with a little bit of envy, and I was saying, "Wow, I wish I could read my textbooks like that, my accounting books," and then I just can't. It took me all the courage in the world to go up to him because I was really very shy at that point in my life. And I said to him, I said, "Excuse me." I said, "Could you please tell me what you're reading?" And he told me he was reading his marketing textbook. Now, I didn't even know what marketing was. I thought he was talking about like a supermarket or something like that. So of course, my next question was, what is marketing? And he got really excited. And he says, "Oh, he goes, marketing is the best subject in the world. It's promotion, it's advertising, it's public relations, it's retail, it's personal selling. Those are all the things I was actually interested in. But for some reason, no one ever told me about marketing as a field of study. And shame on me, I probably should have done a better job at researching what was out there." And I said, that sounds really cool. And he told me, he said, if you're really interested, you should go see Dean Dobbins. Dean Dobbins was the dean of marketing at the time. So I didn't quit school that day. I made an appointment to see Dean Dobbins that week. And Dean Dobbins got just as excited about marketing as this gentleman, Charlie, was. And I said, you know what, Dean Dobbins, I think I want to switch. And I became a marketing major, and without sounding over dramatic, my life changed at that moment because for the first time I was really interested in my courses. I would get to classes early. I would raise my hand in class if I had a question. I would stay after class and ask questions. I would spend a lot of time in the library. And the good news is I was able to enjoy school and I was able to get a marketing degree from St. John's. And I mentioned I finished in marketing. It's one of these topics I feel that I think anybody can actually relate to. I think that everybody has a little bit of marketing in them. So my whole journey with why I'm here today, it kind of started off as a question. I asked the question, I said, what if the secrets to life and business success weren't just found in boardrooms or textbooks and journal articles, but through the arts, like backstage passes or paintings or movies and things like that. So what I did in the book was I kind of share like is what I call is untapped knowledge and wisdom that are acquired from rock stars in the music genre. And also I talk a lot about artists and actors in the book as well. So the book the theme of the book is it challenges you to see the world differently, where art and business are not opposites, because I think that's what I was always taught in business school is that if you think of like arts, it's just one field and then business is another field. But they're really not opposites. I believe that they're complementary ways of understanding creativity. Creativity is a very important part of marketing. I think everybody has what's called a creative spirit, value, and also human connection. This is a slide that I typically share usually at the end of the presentation. For some reason, I just wanted to share it with everyone at the beginning today, just to kind of maybe let everybody know where I'm coming from with this whole thing. One of the shows that I used to love was Inside the Actors Studio, and it was hosted by James Lipton, who I thought was a phenomenal interviewer. And in one of the episodes, he had Tom Cruise on the show. And I learned so much about business from watching Inside the Actors Studio, which is probably what prompted the book. And he said something to the students at the very end of his presentation. If I could paraphrase a little bit for you, he said, there's something I want you to know and share. I love and respect artists, and I know they are among the most important people in the world. And a culture is only as great as its dreams, and its dreams are dreamed by artists. So keep dreaming. I'm very excited for you. Um, Again, this was came from Tom Cruise, and I mentioned in my book, I said music and art. What I've learned about art is that it can bring people from all cultures and backgrounds together. So I thought I would kind of like set the tone early about where I was coming from when writing this book. Let me just move some of these pods here for 1 second so I could see everything. This was a quote that I wrote in the book, and I hate to paraphrase myself, but this is what I believe is I believe that right now there is a great product out there. It could be sitting in a warehouse, or maybe there's an amazing book that's in somebody's files in their computer, or maybe there's a great musical performer, or they have an album or a song, or maybe there's a great movie script. There's authors, painters, entrepreneurs we'll never, ever get to know in our lifetime. And the reason we'll never get to know them is because of poor marketing. Okay, probably because of the awareness aspect or the communications parts of marketing, which is very important. And also, on the contrary, You could probably think of some examples, but there are some terrible, you could think of performers, artists, movies, products we're familiar with simply because of good marketing. So therefore, it's very important that everyone has a basic understanding of marketing because it's one of these things that can certainly make or break a product. One of the examples I mentioned in the book when I'm piggybacking off some of the different artists is some of you might remember in 1985 something happened. They called it the biggest marketing debacle of all time. And this was Coca-Cola. And what happened was Coca-Cola came out with a new product and they called it New Coke. Now, when we're thinking of the science parts of marketing, everything made sense for Coca-Cola to come out with this new product. What they did was they took several hundred thousand taste tests. And out of it was approximately 200,000 taste tests that they took. It's a little over 60% said, now this was a blind taste test. They said that they liked new Coke better than old Coke. So those numbers alone would tell you that it probably was a better product than the original formula. I happen to like New Coke. I remember when it came out, and the reason I liked it was because I'm kind of like a Coca-Cola and Pepsi drinker. I have no, probably a little bit more partial to Coca-Cola, but I'll also drink Pepsi. It was a combination of the two. It was a little bit sweeter if you can use your imagination what New Coke actually was. But they made a very bad marketing decision. Okay, and this is where the arts kind of comes in, is they discontinued Coca-Cola. They said, okay, well, the numbers show that this new Coke is a much better product, so it would make sense. However, when they discontinued Old Coke, one of the things they didn't take into consideration was the nostalgia or the emotional attachment that people have to Coca-Cola. All of us have this or have this notion towards products. We have emotional connections towards products. So this once again is where the art kind of comes in. So the science or the success, New Coke unequivocally won these blind taste tests, but objectively, so it was a better product. However, the failure part came in the art part of it. Okay, the rollout ignored the nostalgia. Consumers felt an iconic piece of their identity was stolen, resulting in what was mass protest. Coca-Cola was receiving approximately 3,000 phone calls on a daily basis. Now, 1985, there was no such thing as the internet back then. There was no such thing as email back then. People were literally calling, they were calling information or 411, or they were writing Coca-Cola and they were saying, please, I'm begging you, bring the product back. When they made the announcement that um, Coca-Cola made the announcement to the press that they were discontinuing the product, people were hoarding Coca-Cola. They were buying as much of it as they could. They were storing it in their basements, and the product was cleared rather quickly. We've never in the history of marketing, I don't believe have ever seen anything like this ever happen. So the consumer was able to ultimately bring the product back to the shelf of the supermarkets. And when they did bring Coca-Cola back, they had to call it something different, of course. They called it Coca-Cola Classic. Um, and it just shot through the roof and it stayed there. So once again, we go back to this whole notion that, bad marketing, it could have been a terrible thing for Coca-Cola if they didn't bring the product back. If they said, you know what, the science says that New Coke is a better product, but we have to take into consideration the feeling for the products as well. I just want to grab my phone just to make sure I'm on track. I don't go too overboard. Sometimes I tend to talk a little bit long and then I forget that we have a time factor too. So I just want to stay on track with the slides. So what this slide here is again showing is that how the two worlds come together is the art comes together with science and they kind of like merge together the two circles to produce what's called superior customer value. It's interesting when we look at the definition of marketing, if you look kind of on the bottom, it mentions that marketing management is the art and science of choosing target markets and keeping, and growing customers through creating, delivering, and communicating superior customer value. And every so often, I have a student that's a little bit, they pay a lot of attention to that particular definition. And they'll say, Dr. Marty, they'll say, why is marketing called an art? Because we talk so much about digital analytics today and things like that. And this is where the whole notion comes in of, again, tapping into that creative spirit. Um, all organizations should have what's called a marketing team. And I think there's sometimes a misperception in marketing. I think that everybody has a little bit of marketing in them. And there's a gentleman, David Meerman Scott. He wrote this great book. It's on my bookshelf. It's called The New Rules of Marketing and PR. And this notion kind of comes from him. And he said something really interesting that made me think. He said, if your marketing team looks like everyone else's, it's going to perform like everyone else's. So he's saying, maybe we should consider looking outside of our marketing department and outside your industry and fill talent gaps. A lot of times I'll talk to my son. He's only 18 years old, but I'll ask him if he thinks something is a good marketing idea or a bad marketing idea. He's not interested in going into marketing, but he has opinions on marketing, if that was a good ad or a bad ad or something of that nature. So we need someone to help us get found, someone who's dedicated to filling the top of our funnel, attracting the right audience, not the wrong audience, through whether it's content that we deliver or search engine optimization, which I'll talk about in a moment, and also digital discovery. The world has changed significantly. Marketing has changed significantly. When I was studying marketing back in um, uh, late 80s, early 90s, what we were studying back then is so different from the way marketing is today. Some of those principles, of course, still apply, but it, because of things like social media and digital marketing and search engine optimization, the world has changed the way we look for products. I'll talk quickly about that as well. And then we need someone to analyze the data. We have so much access to data today. It's almost overwhelming. And we can use a lot of great tools today. We can use the old tools, but we can use a lot of the new tools, like a lot of the AI tools that are out there, whether it's ChatGPT or Gemini. I'm fascinated at how well a lot of the AI tools can analyze a database, and it's usually pretty correct for the most part. And they're not difficult to use, and I'll talk about those more towards the end of the presentation. So again, look inside your company for cross-functional talent. Don't just consider somebody that has a marketing degree that they're going to have all the answers. I think sometimes it's just the average person, that really might have some amazing ideas when it comes to marketing. So I was mentioning in the previous slide, the significance of loyal customers when we were talking about conversion. And there's a reason behind that, is loyal customers is when you hit a home run in marketing. David Meerman Scott kind of refers to them as fans, which I thought was interesting. It kind of tapped into when I was thinking of Star MBA, I was thinking of fans to could be a band or an artist or whatever it may be. But loyal customers, the benefits of them is they'll buy more product from you and they'll also buy more often. But the second bullet to me is the most important part of marketing is that loyal customers will refer new customers to your company. You don't even have to pay them. Okay. They'll actually promote your brand for free because they believe in your brand so much. There's some brands out there where people will actually go as far as getting a tattoo on their arm or their leg or something. Trying to think of ones that come to mind. Harley Davidson might be a brand that you've seen, where their customers will go as far as with wear the shirts. They'll get a tattoo on their arm and things like that. And they tell people about the Harley brand. If you can do this in marketing, if you can get to this point in marketing, you've hit a home run. You've done your job. Loyal customers are also willing to pay a price premium. So if the price does go up, we all see prices are going up today in the supermarkets. They're still going up, right? Now, despite what the media will tell you, sometimes everything is still expensive out there. Okay. But your loyal customers will continue to buy from you. They'll overlook that and they'll say, okay, it's all right. We're not gonna switch. Because there's always somebody else less expensive you can buy from, can't you? And they're also less expensive to serve. We don't have to spend a lot of money advertising to our loyal customers. Okay. Here we're talking about the whole notion of, or the significance of branding. Now, when we talk about branding, I have the definition on the bottom of this particular slide. It mentions a brand could be a name. It could be something like Coca-Cola. It could be a symbol, like if you ever think of the Nike swoosh logo. Could be a sign like the Golden Arches for McDonald's, right? Typically, it's a combination of a lot of these things. Okay, typically, and you also see a tagline associated. Like, for example, Nike has their "Just Do It" slogan, but it's usually a combination of all of these things. There's a great movie out there. I When I teach marketing, a lot of times what I do is I'll refer my students to a movie, because I can't watch a movie without seeing the marketing in it. So I'm kind of a pain in the neck to watch a movie with, particularly with my son, because he always says, Dad, all you do is talk about the marketing part of it. The movie called The Founder, if any of you ever have a chance to watch that movie, or if you've seen that movie, you watch it again. Tons of marketing in that particular movie. There's one amazing scene where Ray Kroc is with one of the McDonald brothers in a restroom. And the I think it was Dick McDonald. He wanted to understand why Ray Kroc wanted the brand so bad. Ray Kroc was very aggressive at taking ownership of the McDonald's brand. And everybody thought it was because of the system or the product that McDonald's actually had. And at that time, it was revolutionary. But what his interest was. Now, I'm always wondering if this conversation did actually take place, but there's a branding lesson here. As he said, it's not just the system; it was the name McDonald's. He said McDonald's. It was just a powerful name. It sounded like America, and the reason Ray Kroc, if he bought the McDonald's system, he couldn't call it Crocs, right? Because he said, who would buy a hamburger that was named Crocs? Like he said, what a load of crop, right? It just didn't sound appealing. But McDonald's had that nice sounding brand name, particularly for the time. It sounded American. There was a lot of bands when I was writing the book, that I came across. One of some of you might be familiar with the brand Van Halen. And when David Lee Roth was talking about why did they name the band Van Halen? Because he was the lead singer. Why would you do something like that? Name it after the guitar player and the brother. He said because Van Halen could have been anything you wanted it to be. I mean, it was different. Um, it just sounded like a rock band. Which was why he chose to say, okay, let's call the band Van Halen. There's a lot of examples out there when bands were coming up with their names. How did they come up with the name of the band? Um, so branding is really it's a powerful notion. The rule with brands is that they can and they should evolve, okay, provided the evolution matches the desired image. There's a great expression is kind of like growing up and growing old with your audience, because your audience gets older over the course of time. And there's been interesting examples that I identified in the book of brands that kind of did a total, let's use the expression 180, and went in another direction, and it exploded. I'm not promoting cigarettes when I use Marlboro as an example, but I will tell you Marlboro had one of the most interesting marketing campaigns, I think, of all time, which was created by Leo Burnett. When Marlboro came out, I'm talking when your grandparents, okay, probably more in your grandparents' generation, the old days, it was a woman's cigarette, and it was a woman's cigarette. It was called Their tagline was called "Mild as May," right? So it wasn't, you could see, a man's cigarette, and they would have these red. uh, filters. Okay. And the reason they had these red filter tips was because if you've seen a lot of older pictures in those days, in the early days, a lot of women, they wore red lipstick so that the lipstick would go on the filter. Um, but sales kept declining and then they remained flat and they were saying, okay, this cigarette is going to make it. And they said, what if we do something totally drastic? What if we flipped it and we had a cowboy image instead? What would happen if we did that? So they tried it. Um, and if any of you remember in the old days when Marlboro could advertise on billboards and magazines and things like that, they had what was called the Marlboro Man. Okay. And it worked. It changed the whole image of the Marlboro cigarette, Marlboro Red. In fact, the following year, sales increased. It was a 3,000% increase in sales in the 1950s, which was really a huge, and I guess I hate to say a successful marketing campaign. Again, I'm not promoting smoking or anything like that, but the theory of what happened there was very interesting. Just changing the image. The product really didn't change, okay? But the image of the brand changed. Okay, mild as May to the Marlboro Man. Okay. Um, One band that I noticed did this because I followed them from a long time for a long time, being from the East Coast, was I followed the band Bon Jovi from the earliest days, from their very first single, before their even first album came out. And one of the interesting things about the band Bon Jovi was their first two albums, they weren't connecting with their audience. They had a huge female following. It's probably, I guess, almost like 80-20, 80% female, 20% male. And that wasn't the image that they wanted for their band. So on their third album, they tried to do something a little bit different. They came out with what was called a cowboy image. So I call it using a Marlboro strategy. And they wrote a song called Wanted Dead or Alive, which is one of the more popular songs in their catalog. And when they were promoting it was what they were actually going to name the album Wanted Dead or Alive. They were all in beards, wearing cowboy hats, and the record company for some reason changed it last minute. But it was very successful strategy. Then they were all able to cross over into the male audience. So maybe it was becoming more like 50-50 when the band released their third album, which was one of the more successful albums. I can't remember how many albums. I think it was like 30 million albums it sold. It's one of the more successful albums of all time. They use that strategy. Facebook is another brand that evolved over the course of the time. In the beginning, if you ever have a chance to watch a movie called The Social Network, Facebook was originally just targeting Ivy League schools. Okay, Oxford University, Stanford, Harvard, Yale, Princeton. That was it. Today, it's not uncommon for people to be in their 70s and 80s to use Facebook. Okay. The brand grew over the course of time. Okay. It evolved over the course of time. So the brand that you have when you first start off doesn't necessarily have to be the brand image that you project through the rest of your time. Um, so awareness is very important when we're talking about marketing. If you remember when I mentioned earlier in the beginning of the presentation, I said there's probably a great product that's out there, and there's a great book that's out there, a great band that's out there. We're never ever going to be familiar with them. And the reason we're not ever going to be familiar with them is a big part could be due to what's called apps or the communications or promotional element of marketing. Okay. When I talk about marketing in terms of promotion, there's different types of communication we can use to send a message. One, of course, is one we're familiar with. It's still, of course, used today, particularly here in the United States, is advertising. Okay, we spend a lot of money on advertising here in the United States. Um, if you look towards like the left, I actually have a billboard. I was able to, the Times Square billboard. It was a band in the 70s called Grand Funk Railroad. And it took 15 individuals, it took them 1,500 hours to create this massive billboard for the band. So if you were unfamiliar with the band, you were definitely became familiar with the band. What was interesting was the rates that they charged back in the 1970s to advertise in Times Square seemed very, very reasonable. We were talking like several $100,000 compared to, I'm not sure what you would pay in Times Square today. But the ban was ubiquitous. In other words, you would see advertisements for Grand Funk Railroad everywhere and anywhere. You would see it in the subways, magazines, Times Square. So advertising is one way, of course, we can send a message out. We also have what's called public relations. Public relations is a little bit different. Excuse me. I think it's more about telling a story. Um, it could be a lot of different stories. Why you started the organization, things that you're doing for society. Sometimes it can help you overcome something bad that happened to the organization um, that kind of tainted their brand. So they have to do a lot of public relations, going on podcasts, radio stations, interviews in magazines, and things of that nature. We also have what's called personal selling. Personal selling is not always a favorite in marketing. There's a lot of people out there that just simply don't enjoy selling, and I understand that. I believe you can teach anybody to sell a product. One of my earliest lessons was in retail. When I was 19 years old, I worked for a retailer called Stern's Department Store, and I sold men's furnishings, which was men's dress shirts. It's like kind of like his shirt you see like right here. And whenever I sold a dress shirt, we had this sales consultant come in and they told us to follow up with a customer. So they come to the cash register, they have a dress shirt. I'd say, wow, that's a really nice dress shirt. Just so you know, we have ties on sale this week. You can get two for the price of one. Would you be interested in seeing some ties that go really nice with this shirt? You'd be surprised at how many people would say yes to that they would want to see it. And then you'd show them two ties, you'd sell them two ties, and then you'd get a little bit more pushy. And they'd say, by the way, tie pins are 25% off this week. Do you want me to show you some tie pins? It was as simple as that. It was really just asking a question. I think what happens with selling is there's this perception that out there that you have to be pushy. I mentioned in the early part of my life, I was certainly more introverted and shy. But sold a lot of ties in my lifetime and a lot of tie pins just because I asked the question. So personal selling isn't anything you should be afraid of. I think anybody can learn to sell. We also have what's called trade promotions, things like coupons and sweepstakes and games. Those are always fun. And of course, we have what's called social media marketing and digital marketing, which has certainly changed the whole game. Um, the way we look for products today, though, are much different than we did in the old days. Okay, a lot of times things will begin with a search. I bet you everyone here today use Google, right? On probably dozens of occasions throughout your day. Just some quick stats. I don't have to go over all of them, but when we're talking like, let's say, business to business searches, 94% of B2B product searches begin with an online search. And usually that online search is typically Google is usually the favorite. Okay. So it's very important when we're describing our product on our websites and things like that, that we have the right keywords, that those keywords are in there. I played this game with my students when we're talking about search engine optimization, just to put things in perspective. And I say two search engine optimization agents or administrators, they walk into a bar to order a drink. And then what we do is we come up with different names for bars, like you can call tavern or pub, and what kind of drink. It could be a beer, right? It could be wine. It could be, there's thousands of different drinks. The key words that we use when describing our business, we have to make sure that we take advantage of all those keywords. There's some really great tools you can use out there. There's a lot of them that are free that will tell you what keywords you should be using um, on your website. I just want to tell a quick story about how social media has changed the whole game because social media, what it's done, in my opinion, is it's given consumers more power than we've ever had in the history of marketing. And there's a great story I can share with you that actually does pertain to the music industry. There was a band called Dave Carroll and the Sons of Sultan, I think was the name of it. And this band was actually from Canada. And the band was flying to Chicago O'Hare Airport to fly back to Nebraska. Okay, or they had a layover or a connection to Nebraska where their concert was actually going to be held. And as they were sitting on the plane on the runway, getting ready to take off at Chicago O'Hare, a woman's looking out the window and she says, "Oh my God," she says, "they're throwing a guitar out there like it's a football." And it was Dave Carroll's guitar. And it was a $3,000, I forgot what type of guitar it was. And he started flipping out. He got the stewards and stewardesses and he said, "You got to get them to stop. They're throwing my $3,000. It was a Taylor guitar." And they said, "Sorry, there's nothing we can do about that. Just, it'll be okay." Sure enough, he gets to Nebraska, opens up his guitar, and of course, it looks just like the picture. It was all smashed. And of course, he goes to customer service at the airport and they ask him if he had insurance on the guitar. I said, "No, why would I need insurance? I trusted you to get it from point A to point B, and I wasn't expecting them to throw this guitar like it was a football." You can actually watch the video on YouTube. It's called United Airlines Breaks Guitars. And so he kept going back and forth with United for months and he wasn't making any headway. They wouldn't even give him Sky Miles. They were just totally resistant. And he said, "Okay, instead of getting a lawyer, what I'm going to do is I'm a musician." This is what he told them on the phone, their last phone call with him. He said, "I'm a musician. I'm going to go to a recording studio. I'm going to record a song called United Airlines Breaks Guitars, and I'm going to record a video." And they said, "You know what, Mr. Carroll, you could do whatever you want. Okay." And he did that. And the video today, I think it's up to about 30 million views. Or actually on the slide, it says 28 million views. Um, United Airlines regretted not compensating Dave Carroll for his $3,000 Taylor guitar because of the negative publicity that United Airlines got on this particular event. So where I'm going with this is social media has given us, the customer, consumer, more power than we've ever had in the history of marketing. And it's nice that consumers can interact with each other today and they can ask people their opinions on airlines or products and things like that. And we as marketers, we need to pay attention to those things. We need to pay attention to the conversations that are taking place within our social media platforms, whether it's YouTube or TikTok or Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever it may be. Um, when I was doing my research, there was a lot of actors I came across that were you're probably familiar with the term typecast. Typecast meaning they they couldn't get parts, okay, and they can't get parts because people associate them with a particular role. Um, But there is a concept out there. We were talking about branding, saying that, you know what, we can take this concept of branding that we were just mentioning, but we could apply it to our own selves. Okay, so personal branding by definition is a process by which we market ourselves to others. It's the way you want people to perceive, think, and feel about you in relation to others. So again, as a brand, we can leverage the same strategies that Nike uses or Coca-Cola uses to appeal to others. There's a mathematical formula when we're talking about personal branding, and it's as simple as, does your self-impression equal your public perception, how people perceive you? There's a gentleman on the board to the right. I always ask my students, I say, does anyone know who this man is? And I'll usually get, for some reason, Grant, the president, or Alexander Graham Bell. Everyone actually knows who this person is. You're familiar with his name, but you may not know his story. I call him the godfather of personal branding, and he must have been brilliant because he was able to shift his name um, or change his name to some extent. His name is Alfred Nobel. And Alfred Nobel made a ton of money in his day. He created, uh, he was the inventor of dynamite and the detonator. And so he made a fortune in his day because the United States was building things. They were building canals. They were doing mining. They were knocking down trees so they could build the country. So you can imagine the fortune that he made. But the problem was eventually the product was used for something else. Okay, and it was used during wartime, and that became a problem because, as you can imagine, dynamite and the detonator were responsible for killing a lot of people. So a lot of people died because of his product. Now, that wasn't the reason he created the product. He created for, um, no pun intended when I say this, a noble cause, to build and make the country great. And ultimately, the product was used for something else. So something happened to him. He wakes up one morning and he's reading the newspaper, and it says Alfred Nobel, the merchant of death, dies. They called him the merchant of death, and it really hurt his feelings because he saw himself as a good person. It was actually his brother Ludwig died, so the papers actually got it wrong. They said, so here he is, he's reading his own obituary, and he's saying all these nasty things about how he made all this money by making this product that killed people, and that wasn't his intention. So fortunately, he was able to take the money that he made and he said, I'm going to do something great. I'm going to create what's called the Nobel Peace Prize. And that's exactly what he did. He creates the Nobel Peace Prize. And if you look at the winners of the Nobel Peace Prize over the years, if you go on the internet, notice that his name is attached to every single person that has received the Nobel Peace Prize that has done something extraordinary, okay, something amazing. His name is attached to all those people. I think it's one of the most brilliant forms of personal branding that I've ever referenced, that's out there. So unfortunately, he did have the resources to do something, but if you understand the concept of what he did there, because marketing wasn't even a field back then, that's what personal branding is. Okay, so there are benefits to personal branding. Personal branding is being what I call it's a red shirt in a sea of white shirts. Okay, you stand out amongst the crowd like you see in this picture here. I always show this picture to students and I always say, what do you see in this picture? And they always say, there's a guy in a red shirt. It's being a red shirt in a stadium of white shirts. Okay, it helps you stand out. I'm going to move just a little quicker, for the sake of time. We have lots of different tools we can use when it comes to personal branding, social media. Typically what happens is we start off with some type of content. Okay, the content can come in the form of a podcast. There are people out there that would be very good at podcasting or like podcasting, but there's also people out there that like writing. So we have tools that can help us. We can blog. Okay, blogging is another wonderful resource because there's a lot of keywords associated with blogging. You can create your own YouTube channel if you want to. You can be Tony of Tony's Pizzeria, and you could have like a 10-minute show every week showing somebody one week how to make a cannoli, next week how to make antipasto or something like that. Just give them enough information to tune into your show and do a quick promo for your business at the very end. There's webinars like we're doing here tonight. This is a great form of personal branding. There's internet radio, newsletters. So there's plenty of tools out there that you can share on the different social media channels. I happen to use LinkedIn as my main go-to for social media, just because that's really where my audience is. Is that they're more interested in business content and things like that. So I want to also emphasize the significance of storytelling. I think storytelling is very important when it comes to marketing. A lot of times when you see some great ads today, take notice that they come in the form of a story. But not everyone's good at telling a story. But here's the thing is everybody has a story. Everyone that's here this evening, what I've learned after all these years is that whether you know it or not, and you think what you may think is a boring story, to thousands of people is a fascinating, interesting story. The trick is to be able to tell the story. I mentioned Inside the Actor's Studio a little bit earlier, and there's two actors that you're probably familiar with. Robert De Niro, who was probably a lot of people probably might consider one of the greatest actors in our day. When he was on Inside the Actor's Studio, I was surprised at how shy he was. He was very reserved. Like he wasn't like, I wanted to know a little bit more. Um, he wasn't great at telling his story. Okay. Even though he has all these great accomplishments and people wanted to hear it. Al Pacino, on the other hand, is a great storyteller. There's artists that are out there. Sometimes I had this conversation with an actress, Nancy Friedman, and she believes that a lot of actors have trouble telling their story because they're so used to just performing based on a script, and I don't know if that's probably not true of all actors, but where I'm going with this is tell your story because it's a great way of whether it's for personal branding or your promotion. What did you say? How did you say it? Was it truthful? People like stories. If you go back to like Aesop's fables, like the Fox and the Grapes or something like that, it's an older story, but people have been telling stories, even like if you ever go camping or something like that, right? People would sit around a campfire and tell stories. People like those things. Marketing is a lot of perception. Okay. Sometimes the word manipulation comes up and I understand why it does, but it's also based on perception. Sylvester Stallone was an example I referenced in the book. When he was filming Rocky, he didn't have a lot of money in his budget. And when he was the final fight scene, when he was fighting Apollo Creed in the beginning, they only had a handful of people in the audience. But when you're watching that movie, you think that he's fighting in front of an arena. Okay, he wasn't. What they had to do is they had to keep switching the cameras. Okay, the reason they kept switching the cameras was to show people on one side, and then the audience would have to move to another side, and they would film that, and then they would film on another side. He had to give the perception that the fight was based on taking place in a whole arena. Otherwise, if it was just a couple people in there, you wouldn't be interested in watching the movie and it wouldn't have the same effect. So marketing is definitely based on perception. I just want to kind of fast forward as we're moving towards the ends is artificial intelligence is changing the game. There's a lot of people out there that think artificial intelligence is going to take away jobs and it's take away our creativity. I found the opposite. Is I've since I've been open to AI over the last year and a half, 2 years, I noticed that I've become a lot more creative. There's a great tool out there called Sunu.com, which can help you write jingles. If you remember jingles, like McDonald's has had great jingles over the years. I would hate to sing it for you, but like I'm loving it. It's a great one. 2 beef special patty, special sauce, lettuce, cheese. So there's really some amazing and easy to use tools when it comes to AI. So I just want to encourage everybody to use those as well. That was just something I want to like open up the doors to any comments or questions because I feel like it's important. If anyone has any questions, Mr. Corey, that I could answer.
Yeah, definitely. We do have one. How to make loyal customers for the first time.
Wow. Well, that's a great question. Okay, because loyalty is something that happens over the course of the time, isn't it? One of the things I compare loyalty to is the benefits of loyalty is trust, isn't it? If you think about it, like trust is kind of like a byproduct of loyalty. It's kind of like when you're dating somebody, it's like kind of like if it's like a first date, right? Is sometimes the first date it goes well, sometimes it doesn't go well. Okay. When it goes well, that's the process of building that whole, you're on your way to loyalty. Okay. But I don't believe that loyalty comes right away. I think it's associated with trust. Okay. So yes, you can sell someone a product for the first time. However, the second sale is always going to be more important than the first sale because it means that they came back. Um, Social media, digital marketing allows us the opportunity to communicate with our audience. Okay, so that's going to be very important is that communication aspect. And you could do it without spending an obscene amount of money. So it's always good to get their information and communicate with them as frequently as possible. So I hope
Very
that
good.
answered the question.
Yeah, and then we have a few more points, one by the same person. What apps and programs do you use to help improve efficiencies? And the person also asked, if you are getting just started, how do you prove yourself to the customer?
Okay, so apps that I use, the ones that I've been using these days is more AI oriented. Okay, so of course I have the Chat GPT apps that I use. I use Gemini. I do use Copilot. I use a lot of fun ones that are out there. I mentioned Sunu.com, which is great for tapping into your creative spirit, like creating jingles for commercials and things of that nature. And let me just go back to the slide and just show the ones that I was using for. Let's see, it's right here actually. Um, HeyGen is a tool that I use as well. HeyGen is an app or a tool where you can actually record something on your phone. Okay, you can record a greeting on your phone and you can actually convert that greeting to another language. Like this was a quick example. Um, I won't play the whole thing there, but what I do is I've used this on my websites. I've used them on virtual trips, like 5 virtual trips that I've been on over the last several years, where you create a video on your mobile device and you can convert it to basically any language. So taking that video in English and now I submit it to HeyGen and HeyGen will convert it to German. Okay, using the same mannerisms and hand gestures and things like that. Now I don't speak a word of German, by the way.
Very good. And let's see here. Besides your book, what other books or authors have you had that have had the most impact on your personal and professional journey?
Oh, that's a great question. There's a book, one of my favorite books in terms of marketing is called Abundance. The future is brighter than it seems. And I love that book because it's very optimistic. It's talking about all the wonderful things that are going to happen through AI technology. A lot of times I find when we're talking about AI today, it's very negative. It's everyone keeps saying, okay, it's taking away jobs, it's doing this, it's doing that. It's also going to do a lot of wonderful things for society as well. So the book focuses on a lot of the positive aspects of what's going on today. There's another book out I mentioned earlier. It's called The New Rules of Marketing and PR by David Meerman Scott, saying, okay, there was an old way we used to do marketing. This is the new way it is. Okay. That is that's one of my favorite books in terms of marketing. So if you're interested in marketing, Abundance and the New Rules of Marketing and PR would be 2 books I'd highly recommend. You can get them inexpensively on Amazon and eBay, I think.
Very good. Thanks, Martin. And
You're welcome.
any tips for overcoming the fear of visibility and telling your story?
Yeah. Get comfortable with telling your story. My life changed through podcasting. I think podcasting, I became I guess you could say a much better speaker, but I've been even better is speaking, talking to people, I love, I find everyone I speak to fascinating. I've learned that everybody has a story and you might think your story is boring, but I guarantee you probably 90% of the people that have heard your story would find it interesting. There's something interesting about your story, something that it changed your life. It was revolutionary that you can share with people. Um, that's very important. So practice. The more you communicate with people, the better. Um, We can't
Uh,
always do that through AI.
and who was the author of the Abundance book again?
That was by Stephen Kotler, and oh, I think the gentleman's name, it's a Greek name, and I can never pronounce it, but it's Kotler. It's called Abundance. The Future is Brighter Than It Seems. And I think you can get that book on audio. Both the books I mentioned, you can actually get on audio. So if you're an Audible person, great to listen to on the way home,
Very,
from.
very good, Martin. And David is asking how to understand your target customer inside out to create a great ideal customer profile. How do you go about that?
That happens. That's a great question. And that happens over the course of time, is the more we get to interact with our customer, the more they start to have a history, the better we start to understand them. There's what's called, and David asks a very good question, it's what's called a persona. Okay. And a persona being, what does our ideal customer look like? Not all customers are created equal. There's this concept out there. It's called the Pareto principle. It's the 80-20 rule. Some of you may have heard of. And there's a theory out there that 20% of our customers can produce 80% of our revenue. And if that was true, who are the 20%? And so we want to know everything we can about them in terms of demographics, in terms of geographics, in terms of psychographics. Why do they buy the product from us? Why do they love our product so much? Why do they refer our product to other customers? We need to know who those people are, because chances are, if we're satisfying their needs, we can satisfy another market out there that's very similar to them, um, based on understanding who that customer is. So what we do is we create what's called that persona, that ideal customer that really loves, needs, and can afford our product. So this is an excellent question.
And now one more question here. How
Mhm.
do you see marketing changing in the future?
Well, unfortunately, the AI, it seems like such a simple answer to say artificial intelligence. I will say this is that, um, get comfortable with using artificial intelligence. Even if you just start off with one tool, you'd be surprised. I have students create jingles, like I was mentioning the McDonald's jingle earlier, loving it or something like that. Um, and they have to create a jingle for a brand, any brand in there. It could be for a cleaners or a florist, or wherever it may be. You'd be surprised at how easy it is, but more fun. To create a jingle in the old days, it would cost a significant amount of money. We'd have to go to a recording studio. We'd have to have people record it for us. Um, and then we'd have to play it on a radio station. It was a significant investment. Today, we could do it for free practically.
It's
So,
amazing.
yeah, so embrace AI. Don't be afraid of it. You'd be shocked at how your whole creative spirit is just totally going to come out. So don't be afraid of it.
And this is the very last
Mhm.
question for today because of the time. What do you mean by making sense of qualitative and quantitative data in the use of AI?
Okay. Quantitative would come in the form of things like surveys and things like that. I was mentioning when Coca-Cola earlier, when they were taking their survey of new Coke versus old Coke in a styrofoam cup, we didn't know which one was which. Okay, but they did 200,000 taste tests, and 60% said they liked new Coke, 40% said they liked old Coke. So that's quantitative data. Qualitative is answering questions like, why do you love old Coke so much? It's getting to those like deep rooted questions. I'm a big believer in using both forms of methodology. I like using it's called the mixed methods methodology, where we use quantitative data and then we use qualitative data at the same time, and then combined that information. And using AI tools, whether it's ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot, does a very good job. You'd be surprised. It just depending on your prompt, how it can combine both worlds together. So, my closing remarks would be consider using both, not just one or the other.
Very, very good. So we're basically at the 6 o'clock hour. I just want to say thank you so much, Martin, for another great
Thank
program.
you
We're
again,
looking
Mr. Corey. It's
and we're
been
looking
a
forward to having you
privilege.
back in
I
2027.
would love to do that. That would be wonderful.
So have a great night, guys. Thanks to everybody
Thank you,
registering for the
everybody.
program today. Cheerio and have a great night.
Cheerio.
Bye.